are still here are refusing to go back, then probably there should be valid reasons for that. You have to bear in mind that whenever people are running away from their country because of political conflicts, some become the targets of political opponents in that particular country. So you cannot force them to go when the law provides protection for them through refugee diplomatic arrangements. So I should believe that Malawi should accommodate those who qualify to be accommodated and also retain those who should be retained according to the law.
The African Union Commission, in partnership with the African Union Development Agency, has officially launched the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Programme Strategy and Action Plan for 2026 to 2035. The three-day event is being hosted by the Government of South Africa in the city of Johannesburg. Among the key participants is the Africa Food Systems Parliamentary Network, former Member of Parliament in Zambia and member of the Africa Food Systems Parliamentary Network, Dr. Dora Silia.
Platform brings together these members of parliament for one reason, and that is to ensure that the commitments made at continental level, particularly CADIP, which is the African Agriculture Development Program, first began in 2003, reaffirmed in 2014, and again reaffirmed in 2025 January in Kampala. It is now being called the CADIP 3. It's a 10-year program asking African governments to commit 10% of their budget to agriculture, to have growth in agriculture at 6%, to support research and development in agriculture at 1% of national governments.
The Democratic Alliance Party's Home Affairs spokesperson, Aldrin Roos, says stripping the citizenship of South Africans who acquire another nationality in a different country is an emotional issue. A section of the South African Citizenship Act stipulates that citizens will lose their citizenship if they voluntarily acquire another nationality unless they apply for and obtain retention from the Home Affairs Minister. The Supreme Court of Appeal previously ruled that the section was unconstitutional. Roos's statement comes ahead of today's Constitutional Court judgment on whether or not South Africans should automatically lose their citizenship when they acquire another country's nationality.
So I think the expectation is definitely to validate the declaration of unconstitutionality, that this provision that South Africans that take on a second nationality without retaining that citizenship, the minister should have their citizenship reinstated. So that is the order that we are seeking to have confirmed. But I think there were many cases where people have come and said, I'm really devastated to have lost my citizenship. Now all of a sudden heard that they are no longer a South African. It's a very emotional issue, a very emotive issue.
Germany's parliament is today expected to elect the conservative CDU party leader Friedrich Merz as its new chancellor. Merz is promising to revitalize the country's flagging economy and boost its voice on the world stage. It ends Germany's recent political limbo after the last government collapsed. The BBC's Jessica Parker has the details.
69-year-old Friedrich Merz has long held ambitions to be Germany's chancellor. Today, he gets his chance. There'll be a vote in Parliament and, if all goes according to plan, the taking of an oath. Mr Merz has said there's a historic duty to lead this coalition of the centre-right and centre-left to success. But snapping at his heels is Alternative for Deutschland, the party that came second in February's snap election. Last week, the AfD was officially classified as right-wing extremist by domestic intelligence. The party claims the move is politically motivated and is suing in response.
For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Jolani Tulongwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Our sports headlines. South Africa's national under-20 national football team head coach is upbeat and confident that his team can inch closer to qualifying for the AFCON quarterfinals. World number one tennis player Jannik Sinner is heading into the Italian Open after serving a 3-month doping ban. I'll be back with these and other stories at the bottom of the hour.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
Well, thank you to Figile Lingwati and Jwalani Tulongwepe with our news and sports headlines. Now, join us in conversation on our social media platforms. That's on X, Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook at Channel Africa, you can also send us your comments and voice notes to +2763 as 406-9126 #Africa Update, and let us know which country you're in. And if you have any stories that you'd like us to highlight or to focus on, send us an email. It is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +2711 714 4459.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
The M23 rebels have seized a strategic town in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo after fierce clashes with Congolese forces over the weekend. The seizure of Lunyasenge town is a violation of a ceasefire that was mediated by Qatar and signed by both warring sides last month. Chris Okangringa has this report from Kinshasa.
Fighting erupted between the M23 rebels and Congolese forces backed by the Wazalendo militiamen near the shores of Lake Edward in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The death toll is still unknown, but many people are reported to have died. The rebels are now in control of the strategic town of Lunyasenge, which connects to the cities of Beni and Butembo by boat. The Congolese army has confirmed the seizure of the town. According to a statement released by the army spokesperson, the M23 rebels, supported by the Rwandan army, carried out the attack in flagrant violation of a recent ceasefire. Last month, the DRC government and the M23 rebels agreed to cease hostilities in talks mediated by Qatar. The US government also oversaw the signing of a document by the DRC and Rwanda that seeks to end the conflict and establish durable peace in eastern DRC. But the rebels and government forces have continued fighting, forcing thousands of people to flee their homes. The US, Qatar, and the African Union are pushing for the resolution of the conflict through dialogue. Chris Ochamringa, SABC News, Kinshasa.
Africa in Song with Chanduko Ligege.
So the artist that I just played now went by the name A.B. Crystal. So A standing for Alfred, B for Benjamin. What's your take on people having two names? Is it because maybe you can't decide on a name?
I've heard people saying that they are named because of whatever that was happening around.
These are all the seasons now. I'm sure now a baby born in the Eastern Cape is called Namatarif.
You see now? Or it was a born baby when it was, what do you call these things we used to pay for men driving?
Nama Itol.
Nama Itol, listen.
Well, Noma Confident is leaving.
Africa in Song with Chanduko Ligege. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time.
It is 11 after 12 Central African Time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Our protesters in Ghana have accused the country's president of violating the constitution and interfering in the independence of the judiciary. Gertrude Tokonu was removed from her post last week pending an investigation into her conduct. The demonstration in Accra was led by the main opposition, the New Patriotic Party, who were in power when Tokonu was appointed by then-President Nana Akufo-Addo 2 years ago. Joining us on the line is our correspondent in Ghana, Eric Mawena Egbeta. Eric, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu.
Now, the opposition protesters are calling for the reinstatement of Tokonu. Has the president made a call as yet regarding this?
No call as such has come through from the president. We know that amongst many things, these protesters, a chunk of them being led by the opposition New Patriotic Party, are demanding the reinstatement of the Chief Justice Gertrude Tokonu, who's on suspension pending the ongoing processes for her removal. We know that there's been a committee that's been set up by the presidency, and amongst many other things, they are expected to begin work, and then they can determine her guilt or otherwise, which will inform whether or not she returns to the position or any other choice. The presidency and the president and all of its spokespersons around the seat of government have had one narrative and one narrative only, that no constitutional breaches have occurred in the process up until now, which has resulted in the suspension of the Chief Justice. In fact, yesterday, when the minority leader in Ghana's parliament, who is a member of the New Patriotic Party, read out their petition at the seat of government, the government's representative who was present to receive the petition on behalf of the government, Stan Dogbe, who is a deputy chief of staff at the seat of government, was emphatic that all throughout the process up until the suspension of the Chief Justice, which is where we are now, which is what has prompted these protests or this protest which we've seen, there has been no constitutional breach, and that everyone must join hands in waiting and allowing the committee which has been set up to investigate these matters which have been brought against the Chief Justice to complete their work, and then a way forward can be determined. And so it does appear the government has already communicated to these protesters that we're not interested in having the Chief Justice return and fill her position until the determination of the matter. We believe that she must remain suspended for the investigations to take place, after which the final determination will inform whether or not she returns.
Now, these allegations are still not known to the public, and I guess the public is wanting to know, and with all these petitions by, for instance, the New Patriotic Party, the reasons behind her suspension is the big contention, because now everyone wants to know. Now, she's expected to be summoned to answer questions in front of a committee investigating these allegations against her. Do you know when this is expected to take place, and how long of a process is this likely to be?
So, in relation to how long this is going to be, the Constitution of Ghana, quite interestingly, doesn't stipulate a time frame for which this entire process of investigating the said claims against the Chief Justice can take place. Additionally, it allows for in-camera hearings, and as such, the proceedings of the entire work of the committee is to remain away from the public. And so we do not know when the committee work is expected to start. We do not know when witnesses are going to be called. We do not even know where they are going to be sitting to start off with, unless insider sources begin to speak to us, and that is what we're on the lookout for. On matters of the content of the petition, there's been leakages of what some of these claims against the Chief Justice has been. One of such, which has dominated media conversation, has been the use of state funds to sponsor her family on a personal visit. And the argument is that when you look at the emolument package for the Chief Justice, it is very strict on not using state funds to sponsor the family on personal trips, but rather state funds can be used and even per diems paid when the Chief Justice goes on business trips. She can take a family member along and the state will cater for that and then pay per diem. But when it's a personal travel, that is not supposed to happen. That's one of the allegations which is quite dominant in all of the conversations which we've been hearing about. And so that's just by way of one of the many things, even though this entire process is to remain in camera and far away from all conversations. Another added detail, though, is that despite the protest by the opposition yesterday, they have as well proceeded to the country's Supreme Court, where they are seeking to, amongst many things, injunct the ongoing processes and then declare the entire process leading to the investigations of the Chief Justice over these claims as null and void, because they believe there have been some breaches or not. The government is fighting that strongly, and we're awaiting the determination of one of such cases a lot later today from the country's Supreme Court as well.
Well, Eric, it's always a pleasure chatting to you, and thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update. We'll leave it there for today.
Many thanks as well, Lulu.
That's our correspondent in Ghana, Eric Mawena Igbeta, joining us on the line. It is 17 after 12 Central African time.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
In a landmark move for environmental justice and human rights in Africa, civil society organizations from across the continent have submitted a landmark climate justice petition to the African Court on Human and People's Rights in Arusha, Tanzania. Africa's top human rights court is being asked to interpret states' human rights obligations in the context of the climate crisis. This unprecedented initiative marks the first time African civil society is utilizing the court's advisory jurisdiction to address the climate crisis. And to discuss this further, we have on the line Nomasango Masiye Moyo, an environmental lawyer collective for Africa. Nomasango, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lillian. Thank you for having me.
All right, Nomasango, I'll ask you to start from the basics in terms of just explaining to the layman what this generally means.
Not a problem. So the advisory opinion really is a form of non-contentious litigation. So in other words, it's not a party-to-party sort of process. This is was basically spearheaded by an organization called the Pan-African Lawyers Union, which houses a number of different lawyers across the African continent. And what they're doing is they're going to the court to request it for guidance. It's moral and legal guidance for the court to answer specific questions related to the climate crisis and different state obligations to protect specific vulnerable groups within the continent in relation to the consequences of the climate crisis.
And how did this move come about?
This move was basically started by a very renowned lawyer as well as environmental activist called Alfred Darnell. Alfred started a coalition of different lawyers, campaigners, and activists who really wanted to take a principled stand against the escalating crisis on the continent. As you know, Lulu, the African continent contributes the least to the actual climate crisis, with less than 4% of global emissions, but a lot of the impacts that we're suffering from droughts, heavy rainfall and flooding events, food insecurity, a lot of these consequences are really burdened by the continent itself. And so this specific coalition wanted to approach the court, that being the highest court in the entire continent, the African Court of Human and People's Rights, to ask it to find solutions to this problem.
And with the solutions in mind, what do you want the African Court on Human and People's Rights to do exactly? And with whatever is or whatever decisions come from the African Court, implementation, how will that work?
So, as you would know, advisory opinions are not binding necessarily on different African states, but because they form part of international law, what they are is incredibly persuasive. So a lawyer who's sitting in his office in South Africa, in Namibia, and Ghana is able to say the highest court in our jurisdiction, the highest court in Africa, has made certain pronouncements about what states' duties are when it comes to protecting women or children or future generations on the continent. And because this is the highest court, there's certain persuasive value that it would have in our own domestic jurisdiction. And so they're able to use a positive finding, a positive advisory opinion from the African court and use it to legislate and advocate for better policies, better laws, better and implementation on a more domestic level, Dudu.
And yes, as an advisory, and it's made by a very high court on the African continent. But in reality, how would this petition address the climate crisis on the continent? Of the fact that it's not binding, and governments can choose to take up the advisory and implement what is decided upon by the African court. But don't we need not necessarily an advisory, but a binding, advisory, so to speak, or a binding, persuasive, decision to come from the court, so that governments on the African continent take up action and do more than what is already been done?
I would not snuff at the actual process, Lulu. As you would know, there are a number of other international courts that have begun this process. You've got the International Court of Justice, which has had its own advisory opinion process currently running last year on state obligations in respect of climate change. The Inter-American Court has also started a process, also an advisory opinion process, aligned with the same sort of subject areas and themes. And the reason why these processes are incredibly useful is because they're so non-contentious, is because they're not necessarily the traditional method of litigation where you're taking a specific party or taking a specific company or corporate to court. What you're really asking for here is moral clarity and moral guidance, as well as legal clarity and legal guidance. And there's a number of useful mechanisms that you can use after you have a positive advisory opinion from the court. You can use this to educate judicial officers much better about the issues that affect the continent, specifically issues like loss and damage, issues like holding third parties responsible and accountable for some of the harms that they perpetrate. Inculcate different sort of principles and values into the actual domestic legislation so that it better protects specific present and future generations. The specific advisory opinion that we petitioned to the court, Lulu, is really grounded in a number of articles that are inculcated in the African Charter itself. A number of African countries are parties to that charter, except for, of course, one country. And so they're obligated and duty-bound in terms of that charter to basically protect the specific rights that are inculcated in it: the right to life, to human dignity, to freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, issues around food security and the protection of private property. All those rights are really articulated in the petition that we're taking to the court, and we're hoping that after a positive finding by the court, that this will then culminate itself in more progressive and useful environmental and climate activism, as well as implementation of environmental laws.
Nomasango, and just going through this and hearing what you have to say in terms of the advisory and a hopeful positive outcome going forward. What should people learn? How do people educate themselves? And how do we educate ourselves with regards to such advisories? And what generally, how do governments respond? What have you seen out there in terms of the ICJ decisions on state obligations and others?
What's really incredibly amazing about this process is that what the court usually does is it enjoins the public, state actors, as well as civil society usually, to basically table certain submissions to it that it can take into consideration before it actually makes specific findings. So there will be, after the court has accepted our petition we filed last week, but after this process, what usually happens is the court allows for certain submissions to be made from a plethora of different industries, and then it allows for hearings to also take place. What I would advise and encourage both civil society as well as states to do is to participate in that process, is to ensure that they put forward their most principled and valued submission to the court if they want to find themselves taken seriously and their issues taken seriously by the court. So if you are a civil society organization that is incredibly concerned about the protection of indigenous communities, or incredibly concerned about the protection of youth and future generations, with respect to, of course, the climate change consequences, then I would say that you want to participate in this process. You want to show the court the reasons why it should take up action and be more aware about those consequences.
And generally, how long of a process is this? How long would it take? And when are we going to find out, the final decisions and advisories?
Because the court has a number of other more contentious issues that are on its roll, this process can take quite a long time. So between a year to 2 years is usually the rough estimate of how long everything could take.
Well, Nomasango, thank you so much for your time on Africa Update today.
Thank you so much.
That's Nomasango Masia Moyo, an environmental lawyer collective for Africa, joining us on the line. It is 27 after 12 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
Large plumes of smoke could be seen in the vicinity of Port Sudan's main maritime port following multiple explosions. Hundreds of thousands of displaced people have sought refuge in Port Sudan after fighting erupted in April 2023. Port Sudan has been relatively quiet in the past, but this changed on Sunday when a military base near Sudan's only functioning international airport had been struck by drones, followed by targeting on Monday of fuel depots in the city. The attacks have drawn condemnation from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and the United Nations has expressed their concern.
Our facility was bombed by 2 helicopter gunships that dropped a bomb on the pharmacy, directly burning it to the ground at 4:15 a.m. on Saturday, and then fired into the town of Al Fangok for around 30 minutes. And then at around 7 a.m., a drone bombed the Old Fangok market. There have been 26 injured, at least 7 deaths, and 3.
Meanwhile, medical humanitarian charity Médecins Sans Frontières, also known as Doctors Without Borders, says its hospital in Old Fangok town in Jonglei State's Fangok County was bombed by SSPDF planes. Our MSF says the bombing resulted in several deaths and injuries. Association coordinator at Médecins Sans Frontières South Africa, Monica Genya, elaborates.
Our facility was bombed by 2 helicopter gunships that dropped a bomb on the pharmacy, directly burning it to the ground at 4:15 a.m. on Saturday, and then fired into the town of Al Fangok for around 30 minutes. And then at around 7 a.m., a drone bombed the Old Fangok market. There have been 26 injured, at least 7 deaths, and 3 of the injured include MSF staff. The damage is extensive and the facility is unusable. MSF has had to evacuate wounded patients to a nearby town, and the Old Fangok hospital is completely unusable, and there is no hospital facility remaining in the town at the moment. It has severely impacted our ability to provide medical care in Old Fangok. We have had to evacuate to a nearby town, and we will not be able to return as long as the violence continues. We've had to evacuate severely wounded patients to ICRC facilities, and in the meantime, the population in Old Fangok does not have access to hospital-level care anymore.
That was Association Coordinator at Médecins Sans Frontières South Africa, Monica Genya, ending that report. Our news headlines up next with Jalani Tulongwepe.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon. Making headlines, Togo leader Faure Gnassingbe has been given the powerful new role of President of the Council of Ministers, which has no fixed term limit. 2 opposition parties, the Democratic Forces for the Republic and the National Alliance for Change, who boycott Parliament, in a joint statement called the move a constitutional coup that could extend his rule for life. Malawi is facing a growing humanitarian challenge as hundreds of Mozambicans seek asylum, fleeing post-election violence and political instability back home, and drone attacks by Ukraine have forced the Russian authorities to shut all 4 of Moscow's airports for several hours overnight. I will have details on these and other stories at 1 o'clock.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Jalani. We say good afternoon to Tabiso Lohoko with our business news. Rather, to Figileni Wati with our sports update.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Good afternoon, Lulu. Yes, it's sports, and we begin with football news this hour. South Africa's under-20 head coach Raymond Mdaga sounds upbeat and confident that his team has what it takes to defeat Group A leader Sierra Leone and inch closer to qualifying for the under-20 Africa Cup of Nations AFCON quarterfinals. The two teams lock horns at the Suez Canal Stadium in Ismailia, Egypt tonight, with Sierra Leone playing in their last group game. The West Africans have already qualified for the quarterfinals and topped the group with 7 points. But Mdaga trusts his boys to do the business tonight.
And if we do our business well, we could go to 9. So it's something that we don't put in our minds. The only thing that we put in our minds is to say, let's live to our strength. Let's go in the field of play and do what we can do best, knowing irrespective of who we're playing. As long as we do what we can do best, that makes us South Africa the kind of football that we play.
Amajita have had a whole week's rest since they last played a game against Tanzania, where they won 1-0 last Tuesday. And Mdaga believes that they have had enough time to periodize adequately for tonight's game.
Bring back the conditioning to say we should remain at the same peak, because in some of the games here, much as we could be tactical, but they do need character of some kind. It need fitness of some level because of the kind of football that is being played. You see, if the ball is moving from one area to another area, you have to follow. So we're trying to balance and cover such kind of things. So it was important for us, and we knew in terms of the program to say this is where we're supposed to be doing this.
Meanwhile, Sierra Leone's captain and star player Momo Kamara sees Amajita as a very special team that they won't underestimate.
Yeah, they are very strong, and we watch their videos as well, where when they play against Egypt and Tanzania, they are a very good team. So we are well also organized and prepared for tomorrow match. So we are going to see what will happen tomorrow as well. It's very important for us, and we want to be the group leaders, because we came here for this, and that's why we always give our best so that we can be at the top. And
finally, tennis news. World number 1 Jannik Sinner says he is heading into the Italian Open with low expectations, and he makes his comeback after serving a 3-month doping ban. Sinner is back on a tennis court at an official tournament for the first time in 3 months after his anti-doping suspension ended. Sinner agreed a settlement with the World Anti-Doping Agency in February and began an immediate 3-month suspension after authorities accepted that the anabolic agent clostebol had entered his system via messages and massage from his physiotherapist. Now he's hoping to leave the doping saga behind him and build momentum for the French Open, which runs from the 25th of May to the 8th of June. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Fire Lengwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Africa in Song with Chanduko Ligege.
So the artist that I just played now went by the name A.B. Crystal. So A standing for Alfred, B for Benjamin. What's your take on people having two names? Is it because maybe you can't decide on a name?
I've heard people saying that they are named because of whatever that was happening around.
These are all the seasonal. I'm sure now a baby born in the Eastern Cape is called Nama Tarif.
You see now. Or it was a born baby when it was, what do you call these things we used to pay for men driving?
Nama Iton.
Nama Iton, listen.
Well, Nama Confident is leaving.
Africa in Song with Chanduko Ligege. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
Our business news up next with Thabiso Lohoko.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Lulu, and good afternoon. The Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, says it supports the amendment of the Employment Equity Act. The Act aims to achieve equity in the workplace by implementing affirmative action measures to redress disadvantages experienced by designated groups. The Democratic Alliance has approached the High Court in Pretoria to challenge the Act, arguing that the legislation is discriminatory, unfair, and has a negative impact on hundreds of thousands of jobs. COSATU's parliamentary coordinator Matthew Parks disagrees with the DA's stance that the act will lead to negative economic effects.
But the DA's concerns are completely invalid, and I think one should just also take them with a pinch of salt. The DA's court case was lodged in 2023, a year before the elections, when the act was promulgated. And the DA ran on a bit of a Swat Kafar election campaign, where they ran to coloured and Indian townships and said, you will lose your job under the ANC. Because in the act itself, and the DA knows this, the lawyers know this, there's nothing of such.
Kenya's National Bureau of Statistics says that the country's economy grew 5.1% year-on-year in the fourth quarter of 2024 compared to 6.1% in the same quarter of the previous year. The economy grew 4.7% in 2024 as a whole, compared to growth of 5.7% in 2023. Meanwhile, the country's private sector growth accelerated to a 27-month high in April, driven by robust sales volumes and a solid business activity. South Africa's private sector showed signs of stabilization in April, emerging from a 4-month downturn as sales picked up slightly and supply chains strengthened. The S&P Global South Africa Purchasing Managers Index rose to 50.0 in April, up from 48.3 in March. A PMI reading above 50 indicates growth, while below 50 points to contraction. AngloGold Ashanti and Goldfields have agreed to pause the talks to merge with their neighbouring Tarkwa and Iduapriem mines in Ghana, 2 years after announcing the plan. The plan to combine the two mines, which would have created Africa's biggest gold mine, had not been advanced, with the Ghanaian government still to make a decision on whether to grant regulatory approval. Ford Motor has suspended its annual guidance because of uncertainty around U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, saying the levies would cost the company about $1.5 billion in adjusted earnings before interest and taxes. Ford reported after the close of the U.S. stock trading session, and its shares fell 2.3% in after-hours trade. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 604. Botswana 13 pula 48. Kenya 128 shilling 485, and Zambia 27 kwacha 66. The BRICS countries, Brazil, the dollar will cost you 5 reals 67. Russia 81 rubles 14. India 84 rupees 25. China 71 20. And in South Africa, the dollar will cost you 18 rand 31. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 88 to the euro. Gold is trading at $3,379 and platinum at $976 per ounce. Brent crude oil is at $61.39 a barrel. For any business stories you would like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business in Johannesburg, I'm Tabiso Lohoko.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
Well, thank you, Tabiso, for that business update. It is at 12:41 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. South Africa's higher education sector stands at a critical crossroads. With rising demand and limited capacity, only about 20% of eligible students are accessing higher education, far below the national development goals. Speaking to Channel Africa on the margins of the second International Conference on Higher Education, Learning and Student Support, underway at the University of South Africa in Pretoria. Dr. Whitfield Green, the CEO of the Council on Higher Education, highlights the urgent need not only for expanded access, but for quality, transformative education that equips graduates with the skills needed in a challenging economy. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe spoke with Dr. Whitfield Green.
So I'm going to talk about higher education specifically, and I'm going to use South Africa as the example, just drawing from my knowledge of the South African system. So I think we have a high demand for higher education, and we have a higher education system that cannot really address that demand at present. In South Africa, we have just about a 20% participation rate in higher education, which means that only 20% of the age group that could access higher education actually are accessing higher education. And our national development target is seeking to increase that much more to at least 30%, but even greater as we go forward. So one of the challenges are infrastructure and space challenges. We have insufficient institutions to absorb all the students we need, and we have insufficient resources to fund the institutions adequately so that they provide good quality higher education. It's one thing about providing access, but it must be access with success. And that requires that we have quality institutions. So it's not just about expanding numbers of institutions, but ensuring we have good quality.
So how do we transform from just being mere a learning place rather than, giving quality education that will bring tangible results at the end of the day where our students will be able to find employment? We have seen most of our graduates that are graduating today after having that qualification struggling to be absorbed into, working places.
So I think two issues are important to consider. One is that higher education is much bigger than just producing students who can become workers. Higher education is about building a critical citizen that's able to engage in societal issues and to contribute to the building of society. Having said that, it's equally important for higher education to ensure that its graduates are able to transition successfully into society, and that includes transitioning into the workplaces. So we must be paying attention to the attributes that our graduates leave our institutions with, the knowledge, the skills, the values articulated as graduate attributes, and for those attributes to enable them to transition successfully. I think we also have to think about what kinds of qualifications and how those qualifications relate to societal needs and workplace needs, and for institutions to be responsive in that fashion. I think we have to build our career guidance possibilities so that we can understand students in relation to their interests and their aptitude, and to encourage them in directions that will enable them to transition more successfully than currently is the case. I think students are desperate for higher education and will take any opportunity of higher education, regardless of the trajectory that they would like to follow after higher education. And I think we need to pay much more attention to that. I also think that the nexus between higher education and employment is not a simple one. And to say that graduate unemployment is a fault of higher education is a simplistic answer. I think in an economy that's struggling, and an economy that's not growing, and in an economy that's not absorbing workers, the expectation that all graduates will be employed is probably a difficult expectation. I also think graduates and entrepreneurship is an important issue. So to build capacity in higher education graduates to think about entrepreneurship opportunities as they progress through their studies and then progress from their studies is also an important element. How can we build African graduates that can actually grow possibilities for themselves and for others rather than just work seekers?
There has been also a growing number of fake unregistered higher education institutions within the cities offering fake education and qualifications. As the Council on Higher Education, what role are you playing in terms of trying also to assist government in dealing with this?
So the Council on Higher Education in South Africa regulates the legal space. So we regulate institutions that are legal higher education institutions. We don't regulate or police the illegal space. That really is the responsibility of the criminal justice system, the police and so on. Having said that, when information is brought to our attention about illegal providers offering so-called higher education qualifications, we would investigate that to check out the legality of the institution, and if found to be operating illegally in the country, we would make that knowledge public through media communiques and such like. We also encourage students who are seeking to study in higher education to do some homework prior to enrolling with an institution to ensure that that institution is legal and is able to offer the particular qualifications that the student wants to study.
And that is Dr. Whitfield Green, the CEO of the Council on Higher Education, speaking to Channel Africa's Michael Mbewe.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.
While a digital revolution is transforming African education, a major challenge for universities is the threat of cybersecurity. African higher education institutions are increasingly targeted by cyber criminals. According to Microsoft's Cyber Signals report, education is the third most targeted sector globally, with Africa being particularly vulnerable. And to speak to us further on this, we are joined on the line by Anna Collard, SVP, Content Strategy and Evangelist, KnowBe4 Africa. Anna, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, Anna, are African higher education institutions prepared for the escalating cyber threats, and why are they particularly vulnerable?
Look, to be honest, it's not just African institutions. It's a global phenomena where, higher education institutions, including the schools, by the way, are being increasingly targeted by cyber criminals and adversaries. The reason for that is, and it's quite common sense, right, is that you have an environment that is not funded or not resourced in the same, like, for example, you would find a financial services institution or banks to protect against these cybercrime or these cyber attacks, while at the same time they have access to a lot of personal information. They are in some way part of critical infrastructure, so they are lucrative targets to these criminals who are looking for like a quick win, and unfortunately, that means that they increasingly are under attack.
Now, what examples do you have in terms of ransomware, data breaches, and phishing scams across the continent?
So it's not just there's a couple of different attack vectors. Like obviously you just mentioned ransomware, which is an attack where the criminals would infect a network and either exfiltrate data or take down the network until the ransom is being paid. That's quite a common sort of technique. But the other thing that we have to remember is that it's not just the IT infrastructure and the networks that are under attack, it's the actual people as well. Like particularly students are predominantly actually not only the sort of 20-somethings, but even the younger ones, like let's say between 12 years and 17 years, so this is like in the school ages, those kids are being targeted by so-called financial sextortionists. That's like a group of criminals that have identified younger people and adolescents as being soft targets to basically blackmail them into paying, again, a ransom. If they don't pay, then the attackers are going to share discriminating content or like nudie pictures that they've coerced them into sharing before. So we're talking about like a myriad of different attacks that spread both across the infrastructure itself, so being, viruses and ransomware infections on the actual IT environment, as well as stealing data, like the personal information from these databases. I mean, they have access to a lot of student information and personal information, and then also the students themselves that are being under attack by, as I just said, these financial sextortionists, as well as a lot of job scammers that are targeting students, with fake jobs, We have the human traffickers that are looking to lure students that are are looking for employment opportunities overseas. They're luring them into these Southeast Asia-based scam centers, and using fake job opportunities. So there's so much going on, and very little in terms of, like I said, resources and skills that the institutions have available to protect themselves against this.
Now, Anna, what strategies are in place or can be put in place in higher education institutions to ensure, apart from their network safety, but also the children who, as you say, could be easy targets?
Yeah. Look, the first one is to be aware that this is going on, that they are being targeted specifically as a sector. It's no longer just the banks or the financial services institutions that are being targeted, but the education sector is a hot target. So that sort of self-awareness is the first step. And then spreading training and education across not just the faculty staff, but including the students. It's really important to make them aware of the threats that are out there, how a social engineering or a phishing scam looks like, what the modus operandi is of these particular extortionists or the job scammers. And to be honest, it should really be part of the curriculum across the board, is to bring in this, I call it digital mindfulness, cyber safety, as like a life skill. It's no longer a tech skill, it's really a life skill. And making sure that everyone on campus understands that they have a responsibility to play to protect themselves as well as the campus network.
And apart from, protection of the young people or children or the campus network, what role, if any, can parents play in also protecting, their children as well as the school's network? Because sometimes you may find that these phishing scams happen, whether it's an unsecure network, where it happens at home.
Yeah, 100%. So I think as a responsible parent, and I'm a parent myself, and I know the challenge, but we need to again, like have a certain level of self-awareness. Also speak with our children. They often can teach us a thing or two as well.
That's so true.
About the latest threats and the scams, and really have an open communication channel. I mean, sometimes it's also not only the threats from outside; it's also the students themselves that are doing inappropriate things that can put them at risk, from a legal point of view. Like, for example, we now all have access to these deepfake generators, and some people think it's funny to create a deepfake, which is like a fake version of yourself, for example, or another child, using video or audio, and that's all fun and games, but it's actually illegal to do that, particularly if it's then combined with sort of, semi-sexual kind of content. The law doesn't differentiate between a real image or a generated image. So those conversations are very important to have, because the youngsters may just think it's fun. And I just had it actually last week in my kids' school, where the fifth graders created a WhatsApp group and shared inappropriate content just because they don't know any better. So we have to have these open communication channels and talk about the things that they're exposed to from the outside world. The predators, the cyber criminals, the way they operate. Often using emotional techniques and psychology to trick us. But then also, what are the things that they need to do themselves that they don't become perpetrators by accident, or that they do, things like cyberbullying or share something that's inappropriate. Because often, they're teenagers or youngsters are youngsters, right? So we need to have that conversation, and also if we're the ones to provide the devices to make sure that they are adequately protected. There are tools available, parental controls, or obviously if you have an older student, they wouldn't want you to set these controls up as a parent, but at least have the conversation and make sure they have antivirus installed and don't do anything stupid, and are capable of spotting the signs before they, click on something or install something that's not in their best interest.
All right. Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update. We'll leave it there for today.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's Anna Collard, SVP, Content Strategy and Evangelist Know Before Africa, joining us on the line. It is 12:56 Central African Time.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African
Mix
Time.
Vibration sur Channel Africa.
Nous allons accueillir sur ces plateaux de Mix Vibration un artiste pas comme les autres. Il est exceptionnel. Il se classe résolument dans la trajectoire des artistes qui défendent le patrimoine du folklore africain, mais aussi de la rumba. Ici, Jérémy Tchani.
En tout cas, je vous dis merci à la Channel Africa, à tout le monde qui nous suit. Dans la vie, si tu veux aller loin, il faut comprendre les temps. Il y a ceux-là qui étaient dans leur temps, mais à cause d'une mauvaise conduite, à cause des gens qui l'accompagnaient, à cause de sa famille, à cause beaucoup de choses, son temps passé.
Voilà, donc il faut toujours gérer le temps. Chaque chose a son temps, dit-on. Et la couronne ne dure pas éternellement, dit-on. Donc il faut toujours gérer le temps que Dieu vous a donné sur la terre. C'est le message que Jérémy Tchani nous amène aujourd'hui sur Mix Vibration à Channel Africa.
Mix Vibration, tous les dimanches de 18h à 19h, temps universel.
Africa Update with Lulu Gaboo on Channel Africa.
Well, it is at that time of the day when we say hello to the Upside team and find out what's coming up today. Hello, Tebogo.
Hello, Lulu. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, and you?
Good, thank you. So we get into conversation about burnt victims on the African continent and reconstructive surgery. We see it more in developing countries than we do in developing countries. And we're wondering, why is that the case? Do we not have the doctors who are able, who are capable, who are skilled to perform reconstructive surgeries, especially on burnt victims? We then speak to a burnt victim about their experiences that they had and what that has done for their, what effect that has had on their lives. And then we have a conversation with a Netflix series that's currently just trending, Unseen.
Yes.
Have you watched it?
I have.
The first season?
The first season. Brilliant. Do you know what? That was brilliant acting. I
am still in awe that Gail managed to pull that off. Not that I doubted her skill, but the emotional toil.
Yes, that character. Yeah.
So we get into a conversation with one of the actors on the show to find out what we can expect in this this season that's currently on the second season, and then we'll have light banter between myself and Nompumelelo as always.
Well, that's all coming up on the Upside with Nompumelelo Ngubeni and Tebogo Lekuleni. For myself, Lulu Gaboo, and the Africa Update team, that's Tracy Boomgard, our producer, our technical operator, Tato Maporoma, and social media, Elaine Bengani. It's been a great day. Continue with us on our socials, and let's do this again tomorrow. Bye.
SABC News. The African Perspective.